Okay, so here's my first impressions on Kinich. I played him last night for roughly about 4 hours on stream after his release on NA. I played him a little bit this morning at the time of me recording this just to get a little bit of a refresher, and here's just my early first impressions on him right after his release. Kinich is the beginning of a new archetype. He's our first Dendro burning Virgin carry. All our Dendro units up to this point have all been very spread, hyper bloom, and like aggravate centric. This is our first one leaning into the pyro side of the reactions. His damage heavily comes from his skill. His skills act very similar to normal attacks, but is considered skill damage, so keep that in mind for set options and building options. He is definitely primarily focused on single target damage. He does have moments where he can shine in AoE. The problem is his AoE isn't that big, and you don't have that great control over where you're shooting it. If he wasn't Dendro, so you could put him with swirl units more comfortably and still be able to take advantage of the benefit, his AoE would be okay, because there is a decent bit of AoE in his hits, but because of how his targeting works, all of his shots are automatically aimed at whoever your target of your skill is, which makes it really hard to manipulate the AI to actually allow enemies to stack up and get multi-hits. So generally, I'd recommend avoiding him in AoE, but he's okay in certain scenarios. In terms of what type of teams does he fit in? As I mentioned earlier, he's primarily a burning and merchant character, so almost all of his teams will be including some variety of power units. Typically Bennett, as he's an attack scaler, so he benefits very heavily from Bennett's attack buff. But surprisingly, he performs shockingly well, just kind of throwing him into your generic Dendro teams we know of in the past. In those teams, you're missing out on a lot of what makes him good, and then you're completely ignoring his unique passives that allows him to get bonus effects from burning being active on the team. But there is a reality that most Genshin players have learned by this point, which is Hyper Bloom / Spread is really powerful, so if you just throw him into a traditional Alhaisam team, he will perform alright. He won't be ideal, you're probably better off running a Alhaisam or a different carry in those roles, but he will function better than you'd expect. His main team options that seem to come into consideration is some variety of him, Bennett, and then 2 flex options. Those 2 flex options kind of run into 1 or 2 roles. The roles can kind of be consolidated between them and mix around depending on how their team options work. But one of those 2 characters need to be running Deepwood. Deepwood is roughly over a 20% damage increase on all of his personal damage. You need to run Deepwood. Who do you run Deepwood on? It needs to be someone that's off-field DPS, whether that be a Toma, who's proccing it from off-field as his burst, a Dea proccing from off-field in their skill, or Xialing. That can, and in other cases, we know the opposite of the spectrum, leaving the Pyro thing, and you put Deepwood on Farina or on Emily. You just need to put it on somebody. I'd say put it on, depending on which combinations you put it on your off-field DPS with the lowest potential damage potential. So typically that would be your Toma or Dea, but if you're opting for a variant that does not include them, look around at your artifacts, kind of feel it out which one seems better for your account. So in my personal experience playing him last night, I have to play him a bit of a handicap. I never pulled Emily, so I'm kind of forced into the bubble of I was pretty much stuck in using exclusively Farina variants. From what I've heard from people talking about Emily tends to be a bit worse than Farina, but with the added advantage of you get to remove all the downsides of Farina, meaning you remove the requirement of a healer, and you remove the self-damage and the different restrictions that come along with that self-damage, as well as you kind of help your ER requirements with Emily. But from what I've heard, from my understanding, her damage is a bit worse than the Farina variants. Because of that, I was kind of locked within those Farina teams, and I have no personal experience to judge Emily, but that is a summary of accounts I've heard about her position, so I would highly recommend her being run in the teams, especially because unlike Farina, Emily is not a very versatile unit, so this gives your Emily's a home for the few people who did pull her. I know she's a bit of an uncommon unit, and Farina's a very high contested unit. Now, this is one area of Kinich's reviews that I'm really unconfident in my position on, which is his personal power level in the meta, and like pull value related features. So, there's a lot of things still up in the air with his power level that's going to be changing over the next few patches. One of them is his Abyss. The current Abyss Blessing provides him 80% free damage percent on his skill, which is his skill's primary source of all of his damage. 80 damage percent is absurd. That's a very powerful buff to be giving him. I've tried testing him with wrong elemental goblets to try to like mitigate some of the damage percent bonus to tone down his damage, and he did still feel strong despite that, but he's still getting an excess of like 30% damage percent even after that. So just keep in mind that there's a bit of it's hard to understand how powerful he is when we're playing him in his most recent Abyss that is designed to make him feel good, which means he has 80 bonus damage percent, in addition to the enemy variety in this Abyss does kind of counteract that though, because I don't know what miHoYo was thinking, but it kind of made this Abyss very anti-Kinich. The top side has a relatively AoB focused first section, as I mentioned he's bad in before, followed by a Danger Resist enemy, followed by another Danger Resist enemy. So the top side he's pretty bad in because 2 of the 3 of the stages resist his damage type. And the bottom side, DPS-wise, it's highly single target, and they don't resist his damage, but just in terms of boss mechanics are very counter him. We have on the first chamber, we have the little Oceanid enemies, I forget their names, but you can't burn him. You can burgeon him, so you can still get your stacks that way, but you physically can't burn it, which makes hitting him kind of awkward, and he's not difficult, you should still be able to clear him in time, but it's a weird anti-synergy floor. Whereas on Chamber 2, we have a similar issue, where it's a single target floor with no resistance, so you think this would be a great floor for Kinich, but they put Magu Kenki there. And in terms of DPS, Kinich has zero issues killing Magu Kenki. You will blow him away very quickly and very casually. But there's one very severe issue with Magu in this Abyss, which is Magu has a dash. And as fun and as interesting as Kinich's gameplay is, it is extraordinarily disorienting playing him versus any enemy that has the movement mechanics in their kit, especially things like dashes. Because one moment you're hooked onto the enemy, you're doing Kinich's kit, you're having fun bouncing around in these circles around the enemy, and then randomly the camera freezes, the fun stops, and you're disoriented as you're trying to figure out where the heck did the enemy go. You will clear it fast, but it just feels really awkward, and it kind of can make some skill issue problems kick in with him on the second side of the second chamber. The first side, he probably does okay in, but again, it's a Danger Resist chamber. It's not great for him. I wouldn't recommend playing him. Chamber 3, on the other hand, is pretty much an exact copy of the last chamber. You have a top side that's Danger Resistant, so you can't run him on top side, and you have a bottom side where it's a single target enemy that you can very easily output the required damage to kill, but there's just mechanical issues that make Kinich's kit feel wrong. PMA is known for flying away and disappearing mid-fight. That's really obnoxious when you have Kinich's character who has very impactful, important, short DPS window times. You can mitigate some of that flying ways by using Kinich's burst during that downtime, which can really help alleviate some of that awkwardness, but it still just feels wrong. And then in the final phase, when PMA falls to the ground and summons the 4 robots you have to kill instead, for some weird reason, Kinich can aggro and target onto the ones that are immune. Meaning you have to actually manually target the correct one, because if the other ones walk too close to when you're trying to trigger your skill will hit a immune target, and you're locked into animation, and you kind of wasted off rotation. You can hold E and retarget, but you're wasting such a large percentage of your uptime that it's really awkward. But again, because the single target chamber that doesn't have Danger Resist, he does blow through the chamber very fast. And again, that's despite me equipping a off elemental goblet to mitigate the bonus from the blessing. He still clears very fast and very comfortably. But it is really hard to judge his overall power level when he has an absurdly broken blessing active right now, in addition to an Abyss that is somehow so perfectly designed for him, yet so awkward and clunky designed for him both at the same time. But now that I've gone over the Abyss, this kind of brings back to one issue that I really have with this kit, and it leaves me torn, which is there is this really weird dynamic between how fun his kit is and its clunkiness built into its execution. One moment, it is this super fun attack where you're hooking at circles of enemies, you're firing off blasts, you're shooting these massive cannon shots that are dealing 100, 200, sometimes 300k damage depending how well invested you are. And then sometimes you're just in the open world, you're killing some trash mobs, and your character gets stuck on a box, a rock, a tree, and your skill stops working. And it really makes me struggle to say how much I like him, because I just don't know on the long term which one's going to be which side of him is going to end up being his legacy. I personally think in his current state, he seems to be a strong unit. Not a meta breaker, he isn't New Violette, he isn't Farina, he definitely isn't like a Nahida or an off-field DPS like that, but he's clearly strong enough to make the cut. But there's so many things going against him right now that make it really hard to tell how good he's going to be in the long term. We have a really awkward Abyss for him right now, in addition to he just came out, He just came out today, yet we had a new set for him that released 3 weeks ago, so the average player will not have a good enough version of his current set. And while he has many set options, there is a significant and noticeable decrease between his best set, which gives him 15 damage percent and 40 crit rate with permanent uptime. His next best set is 34% crit rate with limited uptime, or 18% attack with 50% damage percent. And there's like a very significant drop off between the other sets, and there's a big cluster where there's like 3-4 different set options that are all very good on him that you can all pick between, and you probably have those sets lying around, and you can comfortably equip those, and he will be fine. But me having to account for the fact that I only have 8 talents on him on day 1 because I haven't pre-farmed enough, in addition to me not being able to acquire a version of his new set that is adequate to be worth equipping, I'm leaning to say that he is very strong and he is a pretty future-proof unit right now, but it's hard to make predictions on these things when I'm having to take a guess on how much things will change and improve based on these different factors if you have to change. There is one running trend with a few units that were released recently, and especially Kinich, which is they seem to be what I have to do best predict, is they are building up recent units to essentially bait players into polling for the Pyro Archon. As of the time of me recording this, we have essentially no leaks in the Pyro Archon. All we know about her right now is that we will be getting a Pyro Archon at some point. They're going to have the Nightwave mechanic on them like all Natlan characters have so far, and they will obviously be Pyro. But we don't know anything else. But this does leave one thing that's come in speculation, which is if we look at the recent units, we have had a weird running trend of we have Emily, a Dendro character who's heavily built around incentivizing burning reactions, a pyro reaction. We have Mulani, a Hydro character who ideally wants to be run in vape teams where she can vape her Hydro damage for a big burst, which requires her to have a good source of off-field pyro, which we currently don't have great options for. And now the Kinich, who essentially has the same exact issue as Mulani, which is wanting a off-field pyro to apply adequate pyro for him to enable his main kit mechanic. The main takeaway at this point of the Pyro Archon, and all these different limitations he has in his kit right now, is it's kind of hard to guess where he's going to end up in the long term, because things are just going to change. We don't know exactly where he's going to end up once we have the Pyro Archon in the game. You can do the math and predict it, but it's hard to feel the impact of the different sets when you just don't have the sets yet. So I'm going to have to assume that he's going to end up in a pretty strong spot, especially once the Pyro Archon comes out. But for lack of better words, I am just kind of guessing and winging it. I'd be lying if I said I knew he would be good with Pyro Archon. We don't know anything with the Pyro Archon yet. But he does seem to be powerful, so I think I can comfortably recommend him as a unit, despite all that. But it is worth knowing that anyone who's considered pulling him, there is downsides to his kit. He is not this all-powerful unit. And while it's very likely he's going to get significantly better when the Pyro Archon releases, because Archons tend to be quite powerful units who tend to have pretty potent synergy with the units around them, we could just be wrong, and they could make her some weird main DPS kit, and then all the speculation was for nothing. So do not pull him expecting him to be needed for Pyro Archon teams, because we just don't know. I guess to end this out on a closing statement on my opinions on Kinich, he's a really fun unit to play. He has a ton of super useful exploration passes that make me very likely I'm going to use him for a lot of the exploration in Natlan and its future upcoming segments. But he can be kind of a chore to play sometimes. It's not all that unlikely that things just go wrong, and then something gets interrupted, your skills get knocked over, the enemy has a innate aura that interrupts your ability to trigger burning reactions. But when he works, he's super fun. It's super fun playing his little gimmick of trying to land in the circle to get your charges faster. His cannons do a ton of damage. It's really satisfying seeing the big numbers, and he's just super fast at exploration. It's a joy to play. I do suspect he'll get better in the future, so maybe a few months down the line he'll have a rerun and his perspective on him will completely change. But for now, he's a cool new unit that I recommend people pull on if you have any interest in him. If you don't have any interest on him, you're not missing out on much.